energy audits and energy analysis, really understanding how that building works, really understanding some of the things that you can do to make it more efficient. That's what happens when you apply for an energy evaluation, a home energy evaluation. Now, this is an NRCan offered service. You have to make contact with NRCan as a homeowner, express the interest for an energy evaluation. You'll be linked with an auditor, and that auditor will essentially come to your home on the date that you determine. You'll have a working relationship with them, so you can determine when and what time and things like that. And they'll be looking at a number of things when they come to your home. So they'll be asking you questions like, how old are your windows? When was the last time you replaced your roof? When did you last seal your attic? They'll be asking questions like that. And when they're asking questions like that, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to make a model of your home. They're trying to understand exactly how it works. They're trying to understand how it consumes energy. Is it drafty? Is the furnace on 24/7 because the furnace just can't get the temperature up? The more your furnace comes on, the more electricity it'll use, the more natural gas it'll use. You'll have to pay for that as a homeowner, right? So those are all things that are important, and those are all things that they'll be trying to look for when they're analyzing your home. Now, coming out of that energy evaluation as well, they'll give you a housing information sheet. That's all the itemized appliances and all the installed systems that you have in your home that consume energy or electricity. And all the other things in your home, essentially a building condition assessment. Windows are in great shape, or windows need replacing, or consider window replacement. They'll be talking about things like that. And you can actually take those recommendations and then determine if and what it is you want to implement with your home. So it actually gives you a lot of information that you can use, and you can use that to make informed decisions as to how you go ahead. Now, blower door test, BDT for short, blower door test, is really where they install a mechanism in any of your doors. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see the actual mechanism, right? I have a picture of it there. Now, that mechanism, what it does is it draws air, it pulls air, essentially. What it does is it'll pull the air out of your home. Now, what the auditor will be looking for while that apparatus is operating, they'll be looking for where that air is replenishing itself from. Where is that air getting into your home from? Is it under your window seam? Is it on a tiny little crack under your kitchen sink, under the cabinet? Is it, just behind your couch? Is there a tiny little hole in the drywall that stuff is coming in, or air is coming in? You're looking for where that air is replenishing itself from, because what that links to is draftiness. On an average day without any fan, just with some wind, some ambient wind outside, that's how that air will get into your home. And that's when you're watching TV and you just feel this breeze on you, that's where it's coming from. So they're looking for those areas. And one of the things that they'll do with those areas, they'll comment on how they could be sealed up, because then that will make your home a little bit more airtight, right? So once they're doing that, they're measuring the air tightness of your home. And they'll give you a little number on a scale from 0 to 15, which is called the air tightness ratio, or the air changes per hour, essentially, right? So that little rating will tell you how drafty your home is. Closer to 15, very drafty, of course. It means that the air replenishes itself 15 times in 1 hour, which is quite high. Closer to 0 is a little bit better, a little bit more sealed tight. So that's where you want to be on that scale. Closer to 0, generally around 3.5 is the average, anywhere in that region. But they comment on that as well. So like I said, it's a lot of great information that comes out of that evaluation. Now, someone just mentioned an R value, and what that R value really means is the level of insulating quality that your insulation has. So let's say maybe my hand here is a piece of insulation. If I stuff this into a wall, how well can that piece of insulation resist passing heat through it? That's really what your R value is all about, right? So the higher that value, the better it is at holding that heat in, right? The lower that value, it's just going to let that heat right through. So the main thing with your home is you want some nice insulation. You want insulation that can provide an adequate R value so that your home is nice and airtight. And we'll talk about some examples and some different areas where that's particularly important as well. Now I have a schematic here showing you what your insulation does. So it has two main jobs really, or three essentially. It'll give your home the structure, and it'll divide various spaces in your home, like upstairs from downstairs, your main bedroom from your main bathroom and things like that. And then on top of that, the main role that it has is to protect all of those different areas in your home from the outside climates, right? So you're going to have nice warm air, especially in a winter setting, nice warm air on the inside. And the envelope's job is to maintain that air. Nice cool air in summer setting on the inside, and the envelope's job in summer will be to maintain that coolness on the inside, resist any heat from outside coming in. That humidity that you feel when you walk outside, you're trying to keep that out more than anything else. So the envelope is very, very important for protecting the home and how the home operates across the board. Now, looking at an example of that, and this is coming out from an audit that NRCan did. So another test case, another test scenario. Coming out of this audit of this particular home, the home was at 147 gigajoules per year. And they were able to determine a number of different measures that would help this particular home. So you can see here on the left-hand side how they have it graphically or illustrated. You have upgrading the windows, the foundation, air sealing, the attic, even the cooling system, the hot water system. And they essentially got this down to 113 gigajoules per year. But the main thing is that this started with an energy audit. There are a number of different options you can use. If you look at the left-hand side here of the list that I have, you'll see some of the more sustainable options. So some persons, especially country homes, have been using things like sheep wool, alpaca wood, wool. There's also rock wool as well. Rock wool is spun from mineral fibers that come from specific quarries. And then you also have cork wood as well. Cork is made from the bark of cork trees. So essentially a kind of an emulsion of that and hardening it more than anything else. That can be used in that scenario as well as insulation. Now, some of the other options you can see here, you've got one called cementitious or pore foam insulation. Pore foam insulation comes from extracting, I believe, magnesium and something else from actual seawater, actual ocean water. They mix it with a number of different kind of chemicals to form kind of like a colloid kind of thing. They pour it in, it hardens in place over a couple of days, and then that increases the R value in your home. Now, pore foam insulation is very similar to spray foam insulation. The only difference between which is spray foam insulation usually expands quite a bit when you apply it, right? So if you're applying it to an older wall, let's say maybe a brick wall, a brick home that doesn't have any insulation, if you live in an older home, you may not necessarily want spray foam because it's going to expand in place. It's going to be pushing on those walls from the inside. And that's not necessarily something that you want, right? So in that particular case, pore foam insulation may be something better to consider there, maybe something better to use. Now, there are quite a few companies doing either, right? So you can ask a lot of questions about those. You've also got cellulose as well, loose fit insulation, which comes from the cellulose of trees. So spinning tree bark, using tree bark for that, making insulation. That's blown in, as you can see on the right-hand side of my screen. And then you also have denim insulation as well, which I think is somewhat common in the Ontario region. I think it's just a few small companies doing it. But what denim insulation is, they take older clothes that may not have been in use for quite some time. Now, you also got the conventional methods of insulation, batt insulation, fiberglass insulation, as you can see, which many homes have. So that's something that you can consider beefing up if you feel like your home is drafty or if you need a top up on that insulation more than anything else. Now, the main thing with any of those types of insulation would be to reduce thermal bridges. So especially for the image here that I have with batt insulation, where you can see the actual, batts going between the rafters, you want to reduce those as much as possible, because those tiny little slits between the rafters, you'll still lose some energy there, right? So the main thing is that, the person that you're employing to insulate, they have to ideally know what it is they're doing, and they should be trying to reduce thermal bridges. They should be trying to reduce any areas where you can lose just a tiny little bit of heat, because those tiny little areas, they will add up over time. Now, for any homes where your furnace is approaching, I'd say 12 years generally, especially if you've never had that furnace serviced, one of the things that you should consider is replacing that furnace. Because anything that's approaching, let's say 10 to 15 years, generally it starts to kind of decrease in its fuel utilization value. So it's not usefully combusting fuel anymore. Some of that fuel is being wasted, especially if it hasn't been serviced. Sometimes the burner tips, sometimes they get soot and fouling and stuff like that, and they're not combusting as they should. And that's also going to impact what you use as well, because you have to take in a little bit more fuel to keep the home at one particular temperature. It's just that more of that fuel is wasted compared to taking in that fuel and actually combusting all of it, right? So that's the main thing there with that. So even if you're considering that, consider a furnace replacement. That is something that can be helpful. Now, another option that homeowners have when you get your energy evaluation done is you can get a sizing calculation done. That sizing calculation really looks at the size of your home, the square footage, how many windows you have, how many floors you have, and things like that. And it suggests the design standard for furnaces or for any heating equipment that should be there. And what that really just means is it kind of sizes it to your specific home. So that's not oversized or undersized. Oversized, you're going to use too much energy. You're going to be forcing too much air into those ducts. It's probably going to be noisy. Undersized, you're probably going to be, a little bit cool, a little bit cooler than you want to be on those very cold days in winter, right? So undersized, oversized, neither of them is good. You want to be just right, just in that sweet spot or that sweet zone more than anything else. So you can get a heat loss calculation, and that heat loss calculation will tell you exactly where you need to be. Okay. So for any new equipment that you're considering, consider a fuel utilization value of 95% and more. Now, Energy Star rated units, there's several of them on the market from several different brands. They have a number of great features about them that help quite a bit. So one of the things that they do is that they use better equipment, better fan, lighter weight components, stronger materials, and so on. And what they have is that can give you sometimes a saving of efficiency or an increase in efficiency, 15% just off the bat, right? So that's one of the things that can be useful, can be helpful. And then they have sometimes 2 heat exchangers, 3 heat exchangers instead of 1. So when you get that combustion process, you're really extracting as much heat as you possibly can from that, to the point where you've gotten just about 95% or so of the heat out of that to then deliver that heat into heating the home. So they're a lot more efficient in that regard. Now, they also have things like sealed combustion chambers. If you look at those older furnace units, sometimes you'll see a pilot way underneath, a little flame way underneath. The newer units eliminates all of that, right? Because it has better fuel management and ignition management and stuff like that. So it'll only ever be combusting when it needs to, instead of, constantly combusting, right? So those are all things that help with fuel savings and help with energy efficiency. Flame modulation as well, which is fitting a tiny little valve that responds to what's happening outside. So if it's a very cold day, that valve will open up and you'll be using a little bit more fuel to provide more heat. If it's a warm day, you'll kind of, restrict that valve a little bit. And the furnace will do all of this by itself, right? So it can control it by itself, or it can control itself more than anything else. So that's something that's particularly useful as well. So they're inherently more efficient, and they can be, better in that way as well. Now, the same thing with air conditioning units, Energy Star units, rated Energy Star. They automatically start with better compressors, saving sometimes as much as 30 to 35%. Those compressors, because they're more robustly constructed, they usually have a better warranty. And in many cases, they use better refrigerants as well. If you remember in the 2000s, there were quite a few refrigerants that were banned because they weren't very eco-friendly. The newer Energy Star units use better refrigerants or more eco-friendly refrigerants more than anything else, right? So that is one of the things, especially if that's important to you, something to consider, something particularly useful as well, right? Now you can see here the air generally for cooling equipment for air conditioners suggested anything over 20. So if you can get something like that, that is something that would be useful as well. And for the rebate programs, incentive programs as well, one of the things to consider is that many of the units that you will install, the stipulation there would be that they ought to be installed or ought to be at least assembled in Canada. Even if they're not made in Canada, they ought to be at least assembled in Canada. What you can think of a heat pump as is, think of it as a special air conditioning unit that can work in reverse. So it can provide cooling, but then it can work in reverse and provide heating, right? And it's particularly useful because in many cases where you have a heat pump installed, sometimes you don't necessarily have to use an air conditioning unit and you don't have to use a furnace. You can kind of use just this one, and this one can do all of the heating and cooling needs for your home. You also have them sometimes as dual fuel, as they're called, where it's integrated with a furnace. They're generally good up to about -20, -20, -25, some of them, depending on the actual unit itself and depending on your home's insulation. But generally, if it goes colder than that, and if your home needs more heat, what will happen is you'll have the heat pump in tandem with the furnace, where it can then, come on stream and provide all the heating needs that the home is calling for, right? So, they're pretty useful, pretty robust, designed for specific weather zones in Canada, cold weather zones in Canada. So you have an air source heat pump, which uses ambient air, like actual air, to just extract the heat from that air and uses that as fuel. That's the one that works like a refrigerator or an air conditioner in reverse. You also have a ground source heat pump as well. Now, ground source heat pump is where you'll have like a kind of like a hose installed all around your home. It will be actually buried in the ground, so under the lawn. And what that hose will be doing, it will be absorbing heat from that mud. Mud actually holds lots of heat. And it'll be using that mud to kind of put that heat into your home, right? And mud, of course, it will replenish itself. So it always has that heat. So that is one of the sustainable ways that you can heat your home. And this is great for off-grid homes, for cottages, lake homes, country homes, things like that. A lot of persons have those types of systems installed. They're self-sufficient, right? Another type of heat pump that you have is a water source heat pump. So persons that live close to a lake or pool, pond, river, anything like that can use that for heating and cooling. So that is something that is particularly useful if you have that option as well. So like I said, these are great for cottages, great for individual homes as well. And they use up to 50, sometimes 50% less energy in many cases. Now, those are just some of the benefits of heat pumps. The thermostat is the first line of, defense, or the first point of contact more than anything else for control, right? Now, one of the things that you can consider is a smart thermostat. Smart thermostats have a lot of different features about them that can be useful. So there's some of them that can learn your schedule, and then they control your home based on that schedule. That's a setting that you can turn on and off whenever you want. So even if you leave home, let's say maybe for 2 or 3 days at a time, what the furnace will do, it'll probably check on maybe your location, and then it'll kind of throttle down the temperature a little bit. So that 21 that I mentioned a little bit earlier, it'll probably take it down to maybe 16 or so that it doesn't actually really have to heat the home. Just provides minimal heating just to keep it, conditioned more than anything else. But it doesn't actually bring the temperature up. And that can help you to save quite a bit. Now, even if you do try to replace your thermostat yourself, it's relatively simple. Quite a few YouTube videos, and you can be able to change it. The hardest thing, or the most difficult thing that you'll run into, is the different colored wires. Even if they're not colored wires, they'll have a tiny little letter on them, and the letter will tell you the color of the wire. And then the color of the wire tells you what it does, right? So there's a wire that will control your AC. They'll control, there's another one that'll control your fan. There's another one that'll control the actual heating element in your furnace, and so on and so on. So it's kind of individualized systems that do the heating and cooling for your home, right? But the main thing there is that a thermostat is the very first place to start for that, because that will be useful and helpful. Now, something else to consider, I know this has been kind of a bit of a buzz for quite some time as well. If you have, let's say, a big saucepan, or maybe even a kettle, one of those little push switch kettles that you use for making tea every morning, if you turn that on at 8 o'clock, it's going to be nice and hot. That water is going to be, really boiling hot in there, right? But if you come back at, like, let's say maybe 10:30 or 11 or something like that, that water is cold again. Right. And the same thing's happening with your water tank that you have in the basement. It constantly has to maintain the temperature, so it constantly has to be, heating itself. So a tankless water heater can reduce that, even if this is something that you're considering for your home. The way it works is it's attached directly to your hot water lines. And as you open that hot water line, only then will it start to heat. It'll heat whatever you need, whatever you use. And then after that, it'll shut itself off and throttle down, right? So instead of, constantly warming water, it just heats what you need, delivers what you need, and then after that, that's it, right? So it kind of helps with saving water. It kind of helps with the operation and management of your home as well. And then another thing that goes in tandem with this that is useful is insulating all of your lines, right? Making sure all of your hot water lines are insulated to keep that heat in. That's one of the things that you want to make sure is done as well, because sometimes you can have copper lines running all through the home, and if they're exposed, you can actually feel some heat radiating off of them. If you feel that heat, that means there's heat that's coming out of the pipe, and that's not where you want it. You want that heat to stay into the pipe, into the water, so you can have a nice warm shower or a soak, or whatever you're doing with it, dishwashing, whatever you're using it for, right? So the main thing is you want the heat to be where it's supposed to be, and not dissipating through your basement or through under the stairs or wherever have you.